Welcome to the Policy Committee meeting. With your approval, I'm leading the pledge tonight, so if you'll stand with me. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And again, good evening, and thank you for being here, committee members. We actually have an audience tonight, and that's a little unusual for a policy meeting, but we'll move on. We'll turn this over to Ms. McLeod.
Okay, we have 6 things on the agenda for the meeting this evening. The first policy is 3.206, community use of school facilities, and you have a draft in the packet. We have had a committee that's been meeting for several months to discuss revisions to this policy, and Mr. Young has chaired that committee, so I'll let him kind of go through what process we've been through to get here.
Well, like I said, we met for several months. We had probably about 6 months worth of meetings. The committee attending, looking over this policy was, of course, myself, Jeff Jordan, another fellow school board member. We had Joe Hardiman, Kerry Nelson, Jeff Stacy, Jeff Reed, and Jeff Sandby. We had visitors, Ron Odom and Mr. Wayne. Good blank there for me. But anyway, we what the purpose of this meeting was is try to come up with a fair, consistent way of using our facilities. We found a lot of discrepancies in how we manage that, and this committee came up with several ideas to try to help enhance that and hopefully make us more fair and more consistent, and come up with a way of charging fees for our facilities, not to make money, but just to regain some of our costs. So that was the purpose of this committee. I guess when you go through it line item by line item, Angel, you want to do that? Recommended changes?
Mr. Jordan, since you're a part of that committee, if you have comments during this process, please feel free to also share them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, item number 1, the change there was request for use of the school facility shall be made at the office at the principal at least 30 days prior to the date of use. The change there in red, just added 30 days prior to the date of use. Number 2, student clubs and activities, parent-teacher associations, and other organizations affiliated with the school shall be permitted use of facilities without charge. We struck, the principal is authorized to approve and schedule scouts, 4-H, and parent groups. That's pretty much a given, so we struck that out. Number 3, please stop me if you have any questions on any of these items. Number 3 was school facilities may not be used for private profit, except that unused facilities may be leased for private daycare centers, which provide educational and child care services to the community. No change there. Number 4, all activities must be under the adult supervision and approved by the building principal if deemed necessary. The principal may assign a school employee to be present for using facilities, will be responsible for any damage to the building or equipment. No changes there. Number 5, groups receiving permission for building use are restricted to the dates and hours approved and to the building area and the facilities indicated. Unless requested changes are approved by the principal, entry into other areas of the facility will be considered trespassing. The permission granted for each group may be extended to other groups or individuals, may not be extended. That was the change that we added to that. Number 6, groups receiving permission for building use are responsible for the observance of all fire and safety regulations at all times. Groups will be required to agree to consult with the principal or designee about compliance with existing school safety plan as part of their use. The number of attendees may must be in compliance with local fire codes. So that last part of that was added, talking about the fire codes. Number 7, the use of alcoholic beverages, weapons, explosives, drugs, or tobacco, profane language, or gambling in any form is not permitted in school buildings. We added weapons and explosives and drugs. Number 8, during emergencies or disasters, the board will cooperate with recognized agencies such as the Red Cross, National Guard, Civil Defense, and Lake Simple facilities available without charge. No change. Number 9, the school kitchens are used. At least one member of the cafeteria staff must be present to supervise the use of the equipment. No change. Number 10, the board will approve and periodically review a fee schedule for the use of school facilities by community or civic organizations and other nonprofit groups. No change on that. Number 11, the director of schools shall develop procedures and forms to effectively implement this policy. A is added, a period not to exceed 1 calendar year may be allowed upon one request, and may be renewed at the discretion of the board for up to an additional year, or a maximum of 2 years. Groups using the facilities as the adoption of this policy may be approved to a maximum of 2 years, use beginning at the time of the next regular request for approval. B, the group must have an established organization within the county, or the event must be hosted by an established organization within the county. C, a school custodian must be employed to perform custodian services and must be paid through payroll system. D, classroom use is not recommended, but if classroom is used, it must be put in order before the group leaves or prior to the next scheduled use by the school. E, any school equipment to be used must be specified and approved by the principal prior to its use. The principal shall satisfy himself that the person to the use of the equipment is familiar with it and properly instructed in its operation. All damages to the equipment shall be paid for by the borrower. We'll move on to number 12. All use of facilities requested by non-school related activities must be accompanied by a certificate of insurance showing the Board of Education as additional insured with a minimum limit of $2 million liability insurance and a limit of $1 million may be considered at the discretion of the school's director. 13, school facilities used by Rutherford County Board of Education shall not be used for partisan political meetings. And there was some amendments made at the bottom here, additions, signs, banners, flags, or other displays may not be erected on school property unless the permission of the principal or the principal designee is obtained in advance, and only if such displays do not deface, obstruct, or damage school property. An outside organization shall not restrict participation in an activity or an event taking place on school property because of an individual's race, religion, creed, gender, national origin, or disability. All activities must be orderly and lawful, must comply with all federal and state and local laws and ordinances. Parking is permitted only in designated areas. The use of lighted athletic fields must end by 10 p.m.
Mr. Reed, did you give Mr. Wilson a copy?
I did not, but
And one other document that was added to that is the fee schedule. Review this fee schedule. A form that would be filled out and turned in by any persons who will use the facilities.
Jordan, did you have something you wanted to add?
No, sir. He read it perfectly. You want to read the fees?
I really would rather not. think that's pretty self-explanatory.
I agree. Well, we thought at the time, and Mr. Stacy was kind enough to run a lot of tests for us to check the rates of lights and heat and air and pass bills and so forth. And what schools did we use? Browns Chapel, or was Rock Springs Middle, was that right? And Siegel, or was high school? What high school did we use?
I couldn't remember if it was Siegel or Stewart's Creek, one of the two.
I don't remember.
They were all the newer buildings, so we thought they would be more efficient.
Right.
So we thought that would be a better measure,
Lower price.
lower fees.
You don't remember what school? I don't remember what high school. I don't remember. But anyway, that's how we came up with these fees, along with the some input off other systems and what they were charging.
Mr. Odom, did you have anything you wanted to add? Yes, sir. We've had some individuals request to speak to the committee. With the committee's approval, we'll suspend our rules and recognize an individual from each congregation that's represented if they want to. I do have a couple of names. Yes, Ms. Moore?
If I could just real quickly before we move on to that, and it's just it's a semantics thing, but I think it's kind of a legal thing too. And looking at number 7, the wording, the use of alcoholic beverages, weapons, or explosives, I would think that we need to incorporate the word possession in there somewhere as well, because to me, reading that could imply that, oh, it's okay for me to have a weapon as long as I don't use it, or an explosive. Does that make sense?
Sure.
You say use or possession, or just possession? If you use it, you possessing it. I don't know. What do you need?
Use or possession.
I have a question too before we go on. On number 9, who pays the members of cafeteria staff? Is that out of the payroll like the custodian is?
That's something that probably should be done. I noticed that too. Mr. Benson pointed that out. Specified here, custodians will be paid, but we don't, the cafeteria person. I think that needs to
It should be the same. Yeah.
We'll just add that to it, just to be specific. Okay. Good. It's okay with the committee to suspend the rules to allow some speakers? Getting, looks like a majority of head nods. So, okay, thinking about 3 minutes, or at least the term we would maybe think of is sync. So, one of my favorite words. So we would like to invite our own Commissioner Rhonda Allen to come and share some thoughts with us. Welcome, Commissioner Allen. We're not even putting the timer on you. We're going to be on honest. Okay.
Because you know I like succinct meetings as well.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. First of all, I know how much work goes into something like this, to all of a sudden at the end of all your work have somebody show up and go, oh, by the way. So I respect that, and I want you to know that I do. Our specific concern, I attend a church that meets in a school. We meet at Rock Springs Elementary. Our specific concern really is with the length of time that you're allowing congregations to stay. A new church needs more than 2 years to really establish itself. Really ideally, we need 5. What I'd like to see you do at the very minimum is work some sort of language into your agreement that allows for extensions. Because I'm sure there's probably already language in the agreement that allows for an early termination if you're not a good tenant or it's not a good fit with the school. So I guess I'd like to see the reverse of that, which would mean that if you are a good fit, because there are so many things that I know our church does specifically that benefits Rock Springs Elementary, everything from, angel trees to, benevolence to, an Easter egg hunt now that's pushing, 2,000 kids who come. We feed the faculty several times a year. So we pour a lot into that school, and I guarantee you, if you had a conversation with the principal, custodian, anyone, they'll let you know we always leave it better than we found it. So it's definitely a good fit for us, and I know those are the kind of tenants that you want, and I don't think you necessarily want to push them out prematurely when it's a good fit. So that's really my number one concern, is making sure that there's adequate time to have those good relationships, because you know as well as I do, there's so many negative things that are poured into these children's lives that if we can be a positive influence up close to them, then everybody wins. So, do you have any specific questions of me? I'd be happy to answer them if I can.
I think you were succinct.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate you being here. Brother Glenn Robb. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much. I've moved to this area in the last 2 years and have enjoyed Rutherford County, and I realize a lot of the good things I'm enjoying is because of people like you, so thank you for letting me come. I came here to help the North Boulevard Church of Christ start a West Campus and have enjoyed that tremendously. We're now in the process of negotiating with the Laverne High School to start a church there in the fall, and that's going great. They're on hold until you guys determine your policy, so that's why we're interested in it. Since we're starting a new church in that facility, I have the same appeal. I could have just said amen and sat back down. That'd be a good church term, wouldn't it? Because my appeal is only with the time limit. 1 year with the terminology being a maximum of 2 years seems very restrictive, because to launch an organization such as a church and move toward independence, moving to another location, even if we had property the day that we started using one of the schools, 2 years is a tight timeline. So I would make an appeal that become 2 or 3 years with an extension, a one-time extension, or maybe 1 year extensions beyond that, so that a period somewhere around the 5-year mark would be more reasonable. I understand that you don't want a permanent arrangement between schools and churches, but the 1 year with a maximum of 2 seems very restrictive. So I make an appeal that it be longer, significantly longer. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Rob.
Any questions for me?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to use his too. Now, I had one question that I did forget to ask you all, and I didn't hear it addressed in the policy, and I apologize. I don't have a draft in front of me, so you may have said this. Our question is, from the time a policy is passed, what will the impact and implementation be on existing relationships? So once the policy passes, is it your intent that the clock will start that day, or at whatever predetermined date you set, or will we already, if we've already been there past the policy term, will we be asked to leave? So that's a big concern that we have as well.
Defer to you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, Angel, we talked about this, and when you come back in for your renewal, you're grandfathered in until you actually come back in and renew your contract or agreement, whatever you want to call it. So at that time, that's when you'll be given a notice that you'll be signing up for a year, and you'll have, as it is right now, you'd have up to 2 years on that agreement. So.
They run school year to school year, right? The beginning of school year, is that?
Right now, they're on 3-month approval.
Okay.
So, if your approval ran out in June, and we would let that run out in June, that they could apply for a 1-year renewal, and then after that, they would.
Mr. Estes?
After their 2-year first time, they ask for 2 years. I'm assuming they can ask for 2 years and get 2 years to start with. Is that correct?
So they can ask for 1 year at a time,
1 year at a time.
or an additional year renewal.
Okay, after those 2 years, are they allowed to ask for another year?
Not as it stands now. It's a maximum of 2. That's also what the committee's probably going to be talking about. Mr. Holliday, we'll try to get you up to snuff. Anyone else from a different congregation that would like to speak? If you'll let us know who you are, and again, I think you heard the instructions, so
Sir.
you're good to go.
My name's Nathaniel Hale. I'm with Life Point Church in Smyrna, Tennessee.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the committee, the hard work. We launched one of our campuses in Murfreesboro at the Oakland Middle School in August. Have a great relationship with them. I would say that as far as, we know here in this county how much growth has come into this area. And with that growth, churches want to reach people. And so it's very expensive to build churches, trying to find 24/7 space that we can lease. And that's the beauty of being able to partner with a school. And so I would say that, knowing that with a 2-year limit on that, that would really impact, the planting of new churches in this area. And I think that, hopefully you guys agree that that's important to our community. And so that would, I believe, create a very negative impact on the growth of new churches in this area. And especially with a lot of people moving in here, I'd love to see more churches be planted and started in this area. Also, I'd love for you guys to take into consideration, I know for my church specifically, we have a strategy to plant more churches in this community. Our goal was to, no church really wants to be in a school for 10, 15 years. We love to have our own location and space, obviously. But because it's so expensive to build, it is one of our growth strategies to start campuses in the Rutherford County area. And so we made a sizable investment in this past summer to buy a lot of portable equipment. We have to set up and tear down every Sunday. It takes a specialized type of equipment. And so we made, I'll go ahead and tell everybody, we probably made about a $250,000 to $300,000 investment to be able to pull off the type of church that we want to pull off at Oakland Middle School. And so if we're out in a couple years, most of that equipment can't be repurposed. If our campus grew to a point where we could buy property or lease a 24/7 space, that most of that equipment cannot be repurposed because it's designed for doing kids ministry in a gym or in a cafeteria type location. And so we've made a considerable investment already, not knowing that this was going to happen. And so I just ask for your consideration to extend the limit, particularly for those of us who are here who are already launched into the schools and have a good relationship with them. So thank you very much for your consideration.
Anybody else from a different congregation?
Preachers, we just can't sit and be quiet. Good grief. I had the opportunity to be here 2 weeks ago. Thank you again for all you do. Amen, 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 amen. I'll ask 2 questions here again. I'm not sure that these were addressed. Question number 1, the fee structure. For example, right now, we go to the principal, Mr. Lewis at Rock Springs Elementary. He said, thumbs up, come on, meet in our school. Then he presents the request to the board every 3 months. The board approves or denies. So my question is, that process, then Mr. Lewis sets all the terms. Hey, Pastor Kent, I'm going to suggest you all pay this much for rent. My question about the rate structure is, like the new fees, will that money come directly to the board? For example, the scenario might be that right now at Rock Springs Elementary, my rent is going to pay, toward for a gym coach, a PE coach who's coming to the school as part of their service to unlock and lock and make sure we've done everything correct. So I'm trying to figure out if the new fees would still be pushed, through the Rock Springs budget process, the local school, or would it? And I guess the bottom line question is, I may need to anticipate the new fee structure coming straight to the board and an additional fee, maybe? Or how would that work?
No.
There will be a flat fee that will cover the pay and the benefits of any employees who are required to be there.
Gotcha.
And that is in addition to the schedule for the space.
That totally answers my question. Thank you. The other question that I think we were talking about back here, and I really don't want to do this, but I think some people may ask, so if a church were to meet in a school for 2 years in Rutherford County and the 2 years is up, let's say they went and found another temporary location, could they 6 months or a year later request to meet in a different Rutherford County school? Would that be an option, or is it kind of like one location and that's all? I don't know if y'all thought through that.
That never was discussed.
We missed that one.
Okay, I'm just curious. Just food for thought. Again, bless you, committee. I have way too many church meetings, and you're like, seriously, another meeting. Those were my questions. Thanks for thinking about those as well.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Anybody else?
Let me say one thing. There are a lot of Come on, speak, yes.
Missing a member. Okay.
People that are watching us on television, we have a lot of audience, I've learned from this position. It made me think, why y'all are picking on churches? But let me say what precipitated this to start back in the fee structure, but there's been some Internal Revenue Service rulings and some other places that's saying after a certain period of time, if a government entity went with a particular church or something, it would be that government supporting that religion. And so one of the things that we've had to toy with is how many years to stay so that you don't run into that IRS thing. So the people that's listening to us on TV and that sort of thing, much of the thing was driven by our favorite people in Washington, again, Internal Revenue Service, which brought some of this to the surface. And I don't know as we know the exact number of days, but we got two attorneys here that can probably speak to that much better than I can.
Before we go into just full-blown committee conversation, Mr. Chairman, anything else to add? Mr. Jordan?
Well, we need to say it in reference to a couple of people that spoke too. The idea behind this, the basis of it, is that we are horrified that we might make some money. We don't want to make any money. What we want to do is break even. That's all we want to do. Also, we haven't, and none of this is passed, of course, so many of these people have had no chance to really look at this. But we did decide, at least to present this to you as well, that any money raised, while it might come to the board and be returned to an individual, an employee who's working or whatever, but any money that was paid for the service would be split 60-40, and the 60 goes back to the school. And we were hoping, frankly, that it was 50-50, and we kind of said, well, maybe we can get by with 60-40. And the truth is, although we don't know all the charges and what it will all be, but it may actually be, 65-35. We just don't know yet until we actually put it into place. So the idea here is just to recoup the taxpayers' money and for fairness and for something consistent. And you all come in contact with principals and other people all the time. They have come to our meetings, particularly the last two, and we've had other principals besides the ones that were invited to talk about their schools, and others just came and listened. And I think Ms. McLeod can also maybe address this just a second if she wants to. We've heard nothing from them but positive stuff about coming up with a consistent, fair policy. They're not against this at all, and we've had no complaints about the fee at all. And principals, when you go in to meet a principal and ask for something, he or she has nothing to look at. They've got no policy that covers it. And they can say, well, yes, I guess you can probably use it, or no, and here's what you can pay. Well, I'm not sure what you need to pay. Well, this will clear all that up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We hope it will anyway.
Chairman Hodge, did you?
No, I've just got a question once you get into this.
Yes, sir, go ahead.
I mean, I think it's just my personal opinion, because I've been involved with a group, started church, met in school, I think probably met 10 years, I guess. So, I've got concerns of what we're, the way it is right now. And I would be inclined to automatically start with the 2-year deal automatically, and then go with just 1-year renewables and not have a maximum time on it. That's just my personal opinion. I mean, I think, even 5 years minimum. I think, a lot of it depends on your congregation, I guess. To raise the funds, I would think 5 years would be on the, take you a whole lot more than 5 years to raise enough funds to go out here to be able to stand on your own. I think with going 2 years automatically, and as long as everything is good with the principal and the church, I don't think the renewables would be any problem, I wouldn't think. But I definitely, I don't want a 2-year max. I mean, that's my personal opinion.
Other members?
How would the RS factor that in?
I don't know, the ruling didn't set a set number of years, but it could not be totally open-ended.
There's no magic rule adopted by the IRS saying that these groups that are using school facilities have to be out within 1 year or 2 year. Gray area is undefined. You just cannot be there on a permanent basis. So what you deem to be permanent is going to be something subjective in people's mind. So you have to decide what's reasonable for a reasonable person in that sense.
So you said it could not be open-ended, so
Cannot be open-ended.
so we're gonna have to decide on a maximum time limit?
You should have someone, yes.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I think we also gotta keep in perspective that, that this use right here is for all groups. A church group versus a scout group or versus a basketball program or whatever. So I think, I think it could get rather complicated. But I really think we need to keep the churches as far as if it makes any sense here and everybody else over here, and looking at the big scope of this thing.
So it would just be the churches that would, the IRS is saying that would have to have.
That would be the issue because, of course, they want to have a separation of church and state, and you don't want governmental. The IRS does not want governmental entities to be seen to be promoting a particular faith or congregation or type of church.
There is an issue in federal too that says school buildings cannot be leased permanently. So, I mean, it goes back to the same
Yes.
things, but.
For faith-based.
So basically, but there's not a time factor.
Period. So an athletic club or an athletic league are you saying that we would have to put a?
Well, that would be intermittent, they would be seasonal type
Oh,
use,
okay.
but not on an
Okay,
ongoing.
you're talking about.
Permanent basis.
Permanent,
Right.
right. Yes, sir.
So basically, if I understand you right, you're basically saying a church group has to have a time limit?
Yes, sir. There has to be some sort of time limit.
I mean, how do we know what the time limit is?
It's what you determine to be reasonable, whether that be 5 years, 2 years, 7 years.
But what about if you go the 2 years with 1 year renewables up to a maximum of 10 years?
That's what this committee decides to do. You can do that.
I mean, I'm just trying to formulate, and I guess with some of our guests here, to find out what that magic number would be at the end, I'd be interested in hearing that. If any of you have any good ideas out there.
What would the consensus be of the group? Yes, sir.
Good evening. I'm John Shepard, lead pastor at River Oaks Church, and we are blessed to be able to meet at Blackman High School. We're especially blessed that Dr. Lisa Justice is a part of our congregation. She is an amazing person, as you guys I'm sure know, who work with her. I'm here simply because, just to give you the perspective that we are the beneficiary of just a great relationship with Miss Vick and then Dr. Justice, and we are in the process, we're moving out. I mean, we're able to be building our first facility out in Blackman at Rucker in '96, and none of that would have been possible if we had been told that we had to get out after 2 years or even 5 years. I mean, quite honestly, we've been there 10 years, and just so thankful that to me, 10 years is pretty reasonable when you're coming in, and especially if you are just coming in from scratch and just trying to get it going. Getting people and money and resources are precious. And so just to answer that question from our perspective, I mean, you know, the 2 years and renewable every year up to 10 years that'd be great. And I don't have a dog in the hunt because, like I say, we're blessed and thankful that we're moving out this fall. So, anyway, thank you.
Pastor, while you're at the mic,
Yes, sir.
in that 10-year time frame, have you had a pastoral transition?
We have.
In that 10-year time frame, how large is your regular staff at this time?
We've got 3 full-time and 3 part-time.
And have you been able to, your capital program in getting to a church, was land a investment around year 7 or 8, and now you're moving toward a building program? Help us understand what that looks like.
Sure. Let's see. We started a capital campaign. Actually, we've been in 2 capital campaigns, 2 years and 2 years. And so we've been able to pay off our land, our property, as Mr. Reed helped us negotiate that settlement. And we were able to do that about a year ago. And then we've begun construction in last fall, and we'll be moving in this fall.
And are you moving a congregation of what size?
Good question. Between 400 and 500 in attendance on Sundays.
Okay.
Mr. Estes?
I've got 2 things tonight. First, when we have churches in our schools, that can be something for the school that is extremely worthwhile. As Commissioner Allen said, they do things for the community plus the school teachers. After being employed as a teacher for a number of years, I've also seen some churches that were maybe not as good. They created problems, and that brings me to our next question, I guess to our attorneys, is if we have a church that's not doing a good job and working with the school, how do we get rid of them?
Will there be language in the agreement that is signed between the person representing the church and the school that says if a church is not complying with whatever requirements that principal has with regard to keeping the school locked up or cleaned or managed well, or things put back where they're supposed to be put back, or damages not taken care of, the school principal can have authority at that point to have them removed from the school?
Can we remind the committee that as it is now, correct me if I'm wrong, that they have a year and then they can be renewed for a year. So it's really not a 2-year agreement, it's a year and then a year, and then of course if this committee wants to recommend an expansion, of course that can happen too. So.
If I could comment on that just for a second. I mean, we're going from, not just with churches, but for all groups, a 3-month approval period to a year approval period in this draft. I mean, that's a pretty big stretch. So I would caution going beyond an initial approval over a year. I mean, you can grant, additional approvals as you see fit, but I mean, I think we're doing the right thing by moving away from the 3 months. The committee talked about, if you have a baseball program that's practicing, that would let them have a whole season approved at one time instead of having to resubmit every 3 months. And then for churches, again, you have an entire year, you're approved to, you'd be there for a year, you don't have to worry about the federal approval. But going beyond a year, I think is a little bit risky. And I'm not sure how principals would feel about that. We only discussed going to the year period, so just a caution.
Are we talking now about churches here, which this is fine, I don't really care, I just want to make sure I know what we're talking about. Are we talking about churches and everybody else? Or are we grouping everybody together for the purposes of this conversation? It's not clear to me.
The IRS dictates that it's a separation, correct? Groups.
So if we decided to amend this policy, it would be all right to amend it for churches. We wouldn't have to amend it for, and I won't go back to something Mr. Hodge said, I don't know if you heard it or not, if the audience heard it, but there are literally dozens of different groups. It's not just churches. There are dozens all over. I was stunned when I saw how many there were. But we're not talking about the year. Well, we are talking about the year for them and then another year for them. But we're not talking about necessarily 5 years or 10. We don't have to do that.
Well, you have educational type organizations using the school that will be recurring, year-to-year basis. There's no limit to that. Boy Scouts will be there forever,
Right.
year to year. The issues come up with respect to whether a governmental entity is establishing is supporting a particular religion or denomination or some particular faith. And so the issue is, from a religious standpoint, with respect to religious organizations, are you going, at what point are you deemed as a governmental entity of supporting or promoting a particular religion, maybe to the detriment of another religion?
Okay, I get it.
So they establish a different category for religious groups than non-religious groups.
Well, I would think, to kind of respond to what Mr. Hodge said, it would seem to me that we could come up with some language that would accomplish what maybe I think we would like to do, and renew. If a group was returning benefit to the school, if they were good tenants, if there were no damage, and we've had damage, not necessarily by churches and not trying to single anybody out, but we've had some damage to buildings. If the bills were paid, I would think we could come up with something to where we could, and Ms. McLeod is probably right about the initial year. Probably we could leave it at that, and then surely we could come up with language to do all that, and then we decide how many years we want to go. I don't know what that would be, but I think we could do something.
I was just thinking about, church is the only thing we have to put a time limit on.
Yes, sir.
So, I would think, and I don't have a problem, I'm good with the year, but I'm not good with the 2 years, the way it's listed right here. So, I think if we're talking about two different categories here. So, somewhere along the lines, we either got to have a policy strictly for churches, or you incorporate a paragraph what in this right here is that basically signifies churches only. That make any sense?
Perfect sense.
I don't really think you're talking about two categories, though. I mean, the way this reads and the reason that we phrase it this way is if you look at all the other groups that are using our facilities that we looked at, there is not another group that uses our facilities on a consistent basis every weekend. So when you say you can get initial approval for 1 year, there won't be another group that turns in an approval for 1 year. You understand? Does that make sense?
I could see it being taken advantage of too. Once you get something like this rolling, you get a group that will take advantage of some kind of organization. Now, granted, it'd be up to the principal to approve it. But if you had something like that, I'm just saying, organization wanted to set up a basketball league's not a good thing, because that wouldn't be a year, that'd be just a certain program. I guess what I'm looking at, if you had something like that ongoing, at the end of 10 years, if we put a limit on churches for 10 years, that other group can just keep on going, you know, if you did have something come up. I don't know what a good example of another group would be, but, I'm sorry?
State law provides.
Covers them. Yeah, other organizations.
Mr. Chairman Hodge makes a good point that maybe there's an unintended consequence group out there that we're just not considering at this time. And I don't know who.
I just want to make sure we don't run across it, I guess is what I'm getting at. Just to be safe.
But I think even if there were, the way that the policy is drafted, I mean, the same provisions would apply. If you had somebody else that turned in, you know, use for a year, and they were going to continue to use every year, and there would still be a maximum for that group.
Even though they're not by the IRS too.
Now, I mean, you still run into the issue of leasing on a permanent basis, and if we determine, if we determine that 10 is what we consider to be non-permanent, right? Then 10 would be the maximum. If you're not, I mean, I can't imagine another group that would have ongoing use consistently like that. I mean, in my 13 years here, we've not had.
You've been doing it for this.
I mean, everything else is intermittent, you know, it's a season, or it's a weekend, or it's not a constant.
Can I address this just one thing real quick? Well, I don't think a church would be the unintended consequence that you probably haven't considered with the new fee structure. Because right now, we pay approximately $1,400 a month, I think, to use the high school, including the custodian's fee. I think under the new fee structure, that would go up to about $6,000 a month. I don't know any new church that would be able to sustain that burden for, I mean, very few months at all. I mean, that's considerable. So there may be, the question might be that you would consider maybe a different fee structure for a church, for a recurring group like that. Or else this really isn't even an issue, because there's just not going to be that many churches that can afford $5,000-$6,000 a month in rent.
Okay, down at this end of the table, we're trying to figure out where does $6,000 come from? How does it add up to that?
I can just tell you the rooms we rent.
Sure.
Auditorium, cafeteria, a gymnasium, a few classrooms, probably 4 classrooms.
Oh, okay, so you're all over the building.
We are. Yes, sir. Plus the custodial fee, whatever that fee will go up to.
And that's how many days a week?
It's just a couple hours. It's Sunday morning.
So no
Only.
Wednesday, no weekday?
No, ma'am. Just Sunday morning only.
In the auditorium, gymnasium,
Classrooms.
Okay, because I imagine a startup church, you're all in there together. You know, there's startup, you know, there's 40 of you, you know, and you're all in the cafeteria, all of you, all 40 of you. And then, you know, in a, 3, 6, 9 months time, maybe there's 100 of you. You're still all right there, you know. And so I'm not talking about $6,000 a month for the 100-member church. I'm talking about $6,000 a month for the 500-member church. Are we really still talking about a fee schedule that doesn't work for a startup?
It would be substantially more, because you got an environment for your adults, right? Then you'll have an environment for your babies, preschoolers, elementary, and then students.
Right, but isn't that a characteristic that is adaptable for a startup? I mean, when we're starting up, we don't have 5 different environments. We're starting up. We got one, it's one living room, and then it turns into one cafeteria, and then it grows. But it starts with 5 different environments?
It depends on your model for startup. For us, we started with over 200 people through a mailer and just some community things. It's automatically, you're looking at 3 or 4 different environments. So maybe it's $4,000 a month.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just know it's going to go up substantially. And no matter what it is, when you're brand new, it's still going to be a pretty heavy burden to bear.
And currently it's what again?
We pay roughly $350 a week, $1,400 a month, something like that, $1,500 a month.
Okay,
Depends on if
I'm
there's a
really,
fifth Sunday in the month or not.
I'm really not clear now. Is it 4,000 or 6,000? I mean, what's the figure on, if this fee schedule was charged?
I'll just have to look at it again and add it up. I'll do that.
While we're doing that, can you just share a little bit of experience? Because I do belong to a very small church. We use a nonprofit in Murfreesboro. That's where we meet. We have 40 members, and we meet together in one place. We fellowship in the kitchen. We have babies, so we do have a nursery for them. We have teenagers. They have a Bible study that they have while the adults have Bible studies. So from a faith perspective, I can understand where you do need more space than you might think if we were meeting together. But if it's by family, there are children, there are adults, there are seniors. So if we were to use a school model, even as small as we are, we would be faced with something very similar to that. Could we make it work if we wanted to use a school? Sure. Is it ideal? Absolutely not. So I can appreciate, was not aware, I hadn't done that on whether the impact.
Yes, sir?
What our fee would go up to would be $700 a week plus whatever the custodial fee would be. And I'm not sure what that would go up to. If y'all considered, because I don't see that on here, is that going to go up at all?
Custodial fees are actual rates, so whatever those fees are paying now, they should be the same.
Okay.
You say $2,800 a month.
Okay.
You say 700 a week?
Well, with the custodial fee, it would be roughly $900 a week. So times 4, 3,600, or on a 5 Sunday month. You know.
Okay, let's go with the 3,600. I'm going
Go with
to
that.
ask a question of you rather than the other way around. If our experts have determined, and let's just go with 2,800. Let's forget the custodial fee, if that's all right with you. Let's just go with 2,800. If it's 2,800 a month, and it has been for a number of years, but our expert has determined that that's kind of what it is, and you've been paying 1,400, which is fine. Dr. Justice has been here the last 2 meetings. Absolutely loves y'all. She's terrific principal, by the way, and you already said that.
Oh, she's amazing.
All right, there's $1,400 difference, clearly. Who's been paying that $1,400 since the beginning? If our experts say that our cost is 28, you all paying 14, somebody's paying the other 1,400. Who's paying that?
I guess the taxpayer.
That's exactly right.
including myself.
And that's why we're sitting here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Before we get to amendments, I'll take the less controversial one first. There's additions down at the bottom of the page. What are the intents? Are these things for us to consider?
Yes.
That's part of what the committee came up with, additions to the policy.
Everything is red.
Okay. Are we redundant? And are we inappropriately restrictive if we say an outside organization shall not restrict participation in an activity or event taking place on school property because of an individual's race, religion, creed, gender, national origin, or disability? Is it sufficient for us just to say that all activities must be orderly and lawful and must comply with all federal, state, and local laws and ordinances? If we say that a church can't restrict on the basis of religion, that could present a certain challenge for that church. I feel like that we can be lawful, equitable, appropriate with the statement that says all activities must be orderly and lawful and must comply with all federal, state, and local laws and ordinances. If we're complying with federal civil rights laws, et cetera, then those are the same laws whether the church is at 123 Main Street or whether it happens to be in the cafeteria of a school.
We're going to work off of the advice of our council, I'm sure.
Well, I'm not sure. So I'm asking the question.
I think it could come out. To remove it?
As long as you leave the other.
Yeah, I think so.
Right.
I did not plug that in, so.
Okay, that helps. Thank you. All right, now, here's one that's, this will open a can.
Thank you, Mr. Holliday.
Yeah. From time to time, I have heard of various organizations who want to have some type of raffle. Mr. Sandvig usually steps in on something like that and says, cannot happen. Nonetheless, I've seen them take place in some booster organizations and things of that nature. Help me again.
They are violating the law of the state of Tennessee if they do not have state approval. There is an act, or generally there's one act a year listing which ones will be approved that the legislature passes.
Okay. Even if they get theirs approved by the state legislature, this policy that says at number 7, use of alcoholic beverages, et cetera, or gambling in any form is not permitted. Rutherford County School Board is going to say, I don't care if you did get clearance from the state of Tennessee, you still can't run a raffle in Rutherford County.
And I am not aware that any of our groups have ever gotten that approval.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to raise that so that we did it intentionally and not just because it's always been there.
Yes, sir.
And I might have a follow-up question on that from Mr. Sandvig. So this law that's in place that says we can't, specifically what is it applicable to? Is it applicable to taking place on school property? Is it period? So whether it's a Boy Scout organization or one of our booster clubs or a church wanting to do a raffle, it's all encompassing.
Right. Within the state of Tennessee, it's not just schools, it's within the state of Tennessee.
Gambling, illegal gambling. Now, I think, Jeff, what you, maybe I misinterpreted, but charitable organizations can get approval to do those types, that's what you're talking about.
Yes, that, but.
So if they were, so if a,
The events are specifically approved.
right, so if the charitable group was using our facility, had petitioned to get the approval through the process that's allowed, it wouldn't be considered gambling because they had gotten approval to do a raffle as a charitable organization, is my interpretation of it. Just like the lottery has been excluded from gambling.
So the lottery is not legalized gambling, it's not gambling.
You want to call it legalized gambling?
I don't think we're gonna go there.
If it's been approved.
I'm real close to making you out of order.
Okay.
That's what happens sometimes, is they get approval to run a raffle or something as a charitable organization or a nonprofit group. So
All right.
we wouldn't tell them they couldn't do that if they had approval.
Other discussion?
I have a comment, but I'm not sure if we're going to go in the direction that has a different policy for churches. If we did that, I would suggest that we go along with the IRS definition because every religious organization may not be a church. That would be my suggestion, is to make sure that we follow and intend to use the same.
Faith-based.
Because you say any faith-based organization can upset. I don't know. I'm not.
Well, we can look at the terms, but we can look at how the IRS defines religious organizations and use that definition, like that.
I think that would be the right way to go because it would be very hard to say.
I personally prefer the maximum on any and all organizations without a restriction.
We're going to have to we don't have to, but we very likely, there's going to be a lot of interest in rewording the 2-year thing, I think.
A lot of people have a lot of input to this. And a lot of information has come up tonight that perhaps wasn't considered with that group of people, just a suggestion.
So does this committee need to vote to send back to Mr. Young's committee? Is that the proper procedure?
You can do that, I mean, we have authority to do that if you want to do it, yes.
I'll say,
Lay it on your desk.
I'm really liking this vote a lot. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, I do have one other question though.
Please.
I am leaning in that direction, but are there any things that are pending that would not be able to move forward by putting a decision on? So is there any church that's in limbo?
Everything would just stay the same.
I'm in
I
limbo.
mean, we'd be operating under the policy we have in place now.
Yeah, we're continue as we are at this point. And know that the committee that met, although I attended the majority of those meetings, it is not there to injure or leave you out in the cold. Whatever decision, whatever recommendation this committee makes to the board will include an opportunity for you to be whole also. So don't feel like you're going to, the rug's being pulled out from underneath you, because, yeah, that is not the case, and I don't believe to be the case. Mr. Holliday.
I'll just say as well, though, I think the committee has done an excellent job. I think they've considered everything. I think that what we've heard tonight does give us context for what does a startup church look like. And I think that as this committee's recommendations were approaching this day, the community was hearing about this and was learning, and there was good dissemination of the information, and that's why we have people here tonight to share with us. And I also feel like that there is a perspective that 10 years could be an appropriate window for this, from Chairman Hodge and his personal experience, from the pastor at the church at Blackman, others in the room. I think that we could push forward on this and make a recommendation, understanding it still has 2 board readings that it has to go through as well. And I would be comfortable making that motion unless there's objection, here at the committee. And particularly, Mr. Young, if you want this back, if you want to work on it, by all means, I'll hand it to you.
I've spent 6 months on this already.
You want to move it forward, don't you? I thought you probably did.
So
I'm going to.
Is the only change in your motion, is the change going to be just the 10-year max? That everything's going to stay renewable 1 year?
No, sir. I'm going to label the additions. The additions at the bottom of the policy, I'm going to label those A, B, C, D, and E. And my motion is that we would adopt this with the change of a maximum of 10 years and the deletion of addition B.
You're leaving our attorneys to put the language for the 10 years or whatever that is.
Well, they certainly can return, some nuanced language on the 10 years and then also incorporate the additions in standard format here, those additions A, C, D, and E, but excluding B. That's moved.
You had the other change with respect to use or possession of alcoholic beverages, weapons, or explosives, item number 7.
I am not making that change a part of a motion.
Yes.
Include like we are with the custodial, yeah. As far as the custodial part and the other, we don't really have to vote on that. That's just corrective language. Is that correct?
You're talking about number 9?
Yes,
the
ma'am.
kitchens.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Ms. Moore?
Mr. Chairman, I've got a question, I guess really for Mr. Holliday. I'm still trying to understand where the 10 years comes in to place here in the language of the policy. Because I'm thinking back to what Mr. Reed and Ms. McLeod have advised us on as far as erring on the cautious side of it not becoming a permanent relationship because of the concerns with the whole church and state thing. If that's something that could put us in more jeopardy of someone raising that red flag against us if we had 10 years as a commitment or even a mention in the policy itself. And please don't misunderstand, I'm not saying that I know our churches are good stewards and we certainly love having them in our schools. I just want to make sure that we're keeping everything legally wrapped correctly.
So as a point of order, the motion is line 37, the third word would change from the word to, TWO, to 10, TEN. That keeps in place an annual renewal, no more than a 1-year approval initially, but a maximum of 10 cumulative years. So every year, this organization, whatever organization it is, has to return to the board. I expect it'd probably be on the consent agenda and would need to be renewed.
We have a motion.
Second.
Second, Ms. Franklin. Further discussion?
Okay, just a question. Back to line 24, number 7 there. That's holiday. You don't want the use or possession of alcohol, is that correct? I think
That may have been a comment that happened before I arrived.
I think Ms. Moore brought it up.
Okay.
The point is that just saying the use of doesn't really cover us legally.
It says use or possession.
Okay. I would concur with Chairman Hodges' amendment to the motion.
So do we, Ms. McLeod, do we need to get a second on this correction, or is it just a correction?
What correction are you saying, or possession?
Yes.
Mr. Hawley made a motion, so if he's amending his motion, and there's concurrence with respect to that amendment by the person who seconded his motion, that person needs to concur with that amendment.
She's done that.
Okay, good.
Ms. Franklin has done that.
I'm okay, Mr. Chairman, if this should pass. I don't think I'm gonna vote for it, but I'm okay, if it may be the right thing to do. I'd like to, there's some committee members, people that served very, very well and contributed a great deal. I'd like for them to have, at least have an opportunity to look at this again, and I'd like to see, as much as I trust these two attorneys in front of me here with my very life, actually, I'd like to see the language written down on the 10 years and that kind of thing. But if it'd be the right thing, the committee wants to go ahead and push ahead, okay.
Again, we do, as Mr. Holliday stated, I believe, we do have, this will go as a recommendation to the board, and the board will have two opportunities.
Understood. Understood.
Again, we have a motion, second, further discussion. Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Yes, I stand alone, but that's okay. It's happened before. Oh, no. 3.
Passes. Okay. Thank you very much. All right. When you get through writing, Mr. McLeod, you can move on to number 2. Our visitors, you can leave or you can stay. It's your choice.
Number 2 is policy 5.302, sick leave. And we put this on the agenda, I think at the request of Mr. Hodge, to discuss line 22 specifically. Personnel shall be granted bereavement leave up to 2 days in the event of death of an immediate family member. And I think the issue came up, is it 2 days per death or just 2 days total? It has been interpreted always since we implemented that policy, being 2 total annually. So, further discussion.
I'll bring it up or discuss it or whatever. I had one of our employees contact me on it, and she unfortunately had 2 family members pass away, within a year's time. And, if you read this right here, my interpretation of it basically says 2 days. It doesn't say 2 days per year. You got a day, I can just tell you from a business standpoint, sometimes you got a day of travel, then you got your service or whatever, and then you got a day to travel back. In a lot of cases, you'll basically get 1 day to travel, and you'll have, if you want to say a service, then the last day you're on your own. I'm talking about the business sector. But like I said, when the ladies tell me that, I didn't understand it till I got involved with it. That it's still hard for me to, I guess you could say, accept the fact that this person lost 2 family members within 1 year, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, one of them was travel out of town. Basically had to use personal days or vacation days or whatever for that. So that was the whole reason I asked it to be put on here to discuss it, because unless I'm looking at this thing different, I don't see a time factor.
Just to kind of go through the history of bereavement leave, when I started, for many, many years, there was no bereavement leave in our policy. So for any death of family members, employees took personal days or sick leave days, but that's a part of the definition of sick leave as well. And then several years ago, during teacher negotiations, at that time, we decided to grant teachers 1 day of bereavement leave, and then of course the board extended that to classified staff and policy. And then several years after that, increased that to 2. So that's just the history of how we've gone from none to 1 to 2.
But if I'm understanding Mr. Hodge correctly, are you saying that there's an interpretation out there somewhere that they aren't allowed more than 1? In other words, I mean, the way I read this is, if I lose 3 immediate family members in that year, I'm going to get 2 days for each of those.
Spend 2 total.
No, 2 total. That's where it come in.
Where am I not reading that?
Didn't say it, that's the whole problem.
It doesn't say anywhere in writing, that I know of, other than this employee was told this is the way it is.
So if it's not in the policy, where did that interpretation come from to begin with? Do we know?
Well, I can tell you that it obviously doesn't say annually, I have no argument there. But there was never an intention when that was passed, I was here, several board members were here, that it be 2 per day. Because, I mean, I'm telling you, at the time it was presented and the time that it was passed, the intent of the committee and the board at that time was we had none, and we were giving 1 and giving 2 because you already had sick leave and personal days that you could use for death of a family member. Specifically, that came up because we were trying to give teachers something at a time when they weren't getting very much, number 1, and you had new employees who didn't have any days. And so for a new classified employee who doesn't get their 10 days up front like a teacher does, they would have 2 days that they could use if they had a family member die in their first month of employment. That was kind of the thinking process. So, not arguing that it doesn't say it, and it certainly needs to be clarified, but the intent when it was passed was never that it be 2 per death.
So we are stipulating that the language may be considered ambiguous. Would that be correct? Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Bereavement days, this sounds really bad. They do not accumulate, correct?
Correct.
I know that at the bottom of my pay stub, it tells me how many bereavement days I have, and it says 2.
Correct.
So it seems to me like this would be, if it stated up to 2 per event, that would be clear, and then it doesn't need to be put on my pay stub. Because they're not going to accumulate, and if I've used them, I've used them. If I have 5 family members die, I would get 10. somebody
Correct,
would
if they
do
set
that.
that definition.
Right. And those shouldn't be listed, because you wouldn't list two, because what if the lady had two family members die, and she should get four? I don't make any sense.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I don't understand why we even put them on there.
Right.
I mean, I can go with the per event and take care of this situation pretty easy. I mean, I don't know how the rest of the committee looks at it,
But if I've used those two, then it shouldn't say zero if you're out. I mean, that should just be understood in policy per event, not listed anywhere, because it's not like we're going to accumulate.
Right,
Great benefit.
Right, if it's determined to be two per day, then obviously that would change on your pay stub.
I guess and I appreciate the explanation of the history, because that helps me understand it better, but when I look at this again, I think that the policy does need to be adjusted in the language, because to me, if I'm an employee, and I see that, I'm a new employee, and I don't understand the history, and nobody's explained it to me, and my spouse dies this week, and 3 months later, my mother dies, I'm gonna look at this and say, well, wait a minute, it says personnel should be granted bereavement leave for up to 2 days in the event of the death of an immediate family member. And I think they would have some legal basis to push on that, so.
It was full.
Exactly, yes, sir. So it definitely needs to be clarified in the policy. We just need to decide, I guess, if we want to keep it 2 annually or you want to make it 2 per, so that we can make the language clear.
the way I look at it, per event. I mean, the other way you can look at it, you know, if you got travel involved and all that, I mean, I'm good with the 2 days. You know, if they have to travel across country, still 2 days. You know, if it's somewhere local, still 2 days.
And the grace of the policy is in the language that allows for sick leave to be used for that as well. And so if they do have to travel across the country, then they can use sick leave days in order to take care of that additional travel.
In person.
Is that a motion, Chairman Hodge?
Is your language going to say up to 2 days per event in the event of?
Well, that was my next question.
Is that how
Do you
the
want to
language?
leave it like it is, or do you want to add a per event?
Don't you think per event would be, make it
Clear.
clear it up?
I think that would be, as an employee, I guess people have different work ethic, but for people that are seriously dedicated to their work, if bereavement were to occur 2 days per event, I think would be justified if we're gonna have a true bereavement policy. If we're not gonna have that policy, just maybe delete it altogether.
I would be very inclined to agree with that. As a matter of fact, I've never seen her work with a bereavement policy that was anything less than 3 days for an immediate family member, because you have not only travel time and those kind of things to consider, but to me, the whole grief period too. If someone loses a spouse or a parent, or God forbid a child. However, I think, if I'm understanding correctly, although I wasn't around back then, that the history of this probably was that the system is generous enough, please correct me if I'm wrong or making assumptions here that I shouldn't be, that our policies are generous enough to the teachers and the staff through the number of sick days and personal days that they get, that this really shouldn't, at the end of the day, wind up being, as far as the number of days, necessarily a big thing. Am I, because most companies, private companies, don't offer, let's face it, the kind of sick leave and personal that I think that our school system employees are offering. So it is a definite benefit.
Absolutely.
Before we have any other conversation, Chairman Hodge, that is your motion, correct?
I see.
And second. Now we'll go to Mr. Kirby. So now, further discussion.
I guess only thing I'll say further, and then I'll hush, is all the items listed here, just to make sure the committee's all good with that.
That's state law, I think. Under that, we copied that, I think, didn't we?
Which part, are you talking about the immediate family?
Immediate family and
Wasn't that in
all
the
that.
law? State sick leave law.
extended what's here, is that what you're saying?
We did.
Okay. I mean, that, you know, if the committee's good with it, I'm good with it.
Now that, can of worms, I don't want to open, but
I need to pick up the gavel on you
the
too.
definition of spouse. If that's something that we might get challenged on at some point.
Don't go there.
We have a motion and a second, and just to clarify, Mr. Cloud, the language will be,
Personnel shall be granted bereavement leave up to 2 days per event in the death of an immediate family member.
everybody clear? Again, last call for further discussion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Number 3,
Number 3 is policy 4.403, reconsideration of instructional materials and textbooks. And you'll see a proposed revision under number 7, the part that's in the red, and just a small explanation as to how this came up. We had some requests filed with our instruction department to reconsider some textbooks. And looking at the policy and going through that process, we realized that there is an appeal to the board from that instruction department process for instructional materials and textbooks. And the discussion came up between Mr. Odom and Mr. Zago and I about the board approving textbooks on the front end and then hearing an appeal on the back end that may cause you to reconsider that. And so in discussions with TSBA, there's a statutory requirement that there be an appeal to the board. So what we recommended is that you take out the appeal for textbook reconsideration, but leave in the appeal for instructional materials, as you don't approve the instructional material on the front end. Just a suggestion.
Ms. Moore?
thank you. I'll open this can of worms because I am very strongly opposed to that, and I'll explain why. I mean, I understand that philosophy to a point, but based on what we've been through with the whole textbook process, the board isn't really approving those textbooks, and let me elaborate on what I mean by that. The state textbook committee makes its selections, sends them on to the LEA. The LEA looks at them, gives them to our committees that are set up with the different teachers to review them. Those teachers come back with their specific recommendation out of that broad list that the state has provided, and the board approves them based on that committee's recommendation. So to me, the board hasn't reviewed those materials any more than they reviewed the instructional materials that we're talking about here. And if you have an individual or a group that feels strongly enough about one of those textbooks that they're willing to go to the trouble to file a request for reconsideration of those materials, I think the board has responsibility to let it go all the way through what should be a normal appeals process for our system. Because again, somebody finds something in that textbook, we may have approved it based on recommendation from the committee, if I'm making sense, but we didn't approve it based on our own personal knowledge or reading of that textbook or the materials that are being questioned. So, I would be opposed to that
So
language,
your desire is to leave it as it is. Is that correct?
to allow the appeal all the way up.
I have no particular problem with what Ms. Moore just said. And I guess I'd like to see it go all the way through as well. But I do want to say this. I think I just promised myself years ago that I would never make this mistake. You hire great people. I'm pretty sure we do that. And we have terrific staff, many of them are here. And we get some volunteers that are eminently qualified, and they have a job to do. And we let them do it. And then somebody complains about the final selection. And we go back and review the work of the very people that we hired to do the work in the first place. That bothers me. But I'm going to weigh that with what Ms. Moore just said. I've got no particular problem. If somebody wants to bring me a textbook and say this is inappropriate, I think we ought to have the authority. keep the authority to look at it. If a citizen makes that request, we work for them. So I'm okay.
And we continue to speak about local control when we're dealing with our legislature as it is today. So that kind of falls in line with what we've been preaching about local control.
One thing I didn't like, and I think you agree with this, Ms. Moore, is I think maybe in some areas we didn't have, the committee didn't have a whole lot of selections to choose from. And may have eliminated some stuff that you and I might have chosen. I don't know, but we might have. I'd like to have a lot of options there that maybe we didn't get. We don't know. We didn't see them.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And I know they weren't the same ones adopted. We watched on television as numerous school boards were inundated with complaints and problems with textbooks. And that's happened within the last few months. And lo and behold, it was not our textbook.
Right.
Well, I don't know what was in those textbooks, but it wasn't ours, and we had some complaints, so.
Well, and Mr. Jordan, if I may, I completely understand and agree with where you're coming from. I have the utmost respect for our teachers and the people that we put on these committees and select to review these things. But again, I keep going back to, well, first of all, the question with the textbooks in general. There is a school of thought out there, a lot of people out there, that the textbooks that were so hotly protested, of course, were our social studies textbooks that involve the subject of world religions and politics. And there is a school of thought out there that even many of our history teachers aren't necessarily qualified to make a call on whether or not some of that history is accurate or being presented in a biased fashion. But all of that aside, at the end of the day, I mean, yes, we trust our staff to do the right thing. We hire good people, no doubt about it. But it's the same thing, for instance, with a disciplinary process. You know, when we've got a child that the school has decided to expel, and Mr. Odom has upheld that principal's decision and the committee has, if they choose to appeal it, they still have due process all the way up through the school board.
I will say, just for clarity, that due process in discipline, and specifically with zero tolerance offenses, is for the process and the board's review of the process, and not for the offense. Our review, and correct me if I'm wrong, attorneys, but our review of a zero tolerance offense is, has that student and their case and their parents been heard, fairly considered, and given its appropriate progression through the process. We don't go back. It's not the instructions that I see for us to go back and re-examine the facts of the offense and pass judgment on that. Ours is a review of the process. Am I right?
Yes.
That's the training that I've received. Well, if we grant a new hearing, then that becomes a new hearing, but our, okay, yeah, yeah.
Anybody else? Since I'm not hearing a motion or anything, we'll just,
I would like to propose a motion.
there's no need.
Okay.
Is there, I mean,
We just take no action.
yeah, there's just no action.
Since it's an addition. Okay, all right, very good, thank you.
Okay, number 4.
The next two, both policy 1.18 and policy 5.305 are recommendations from the SBA. .108 nepotism, if you look on the second paragraph, our current policy says whenever a person is considered by the director of schools for initial employment in the system, and that person is related to a member of the board, the director of schools, an administrative assistant, a county commissioner, or any appointed or elected official, the relationship shall be publicly made known to the board prior to the employment of such person. And as TSBA reviews district policies periodically just for compliance with state and local federal rules and regulations, they send us updates, and publicly, as you see marked out there, is not included in the statutory language. So they advise that we delete that from our policy It is required that you let them know, but there's no publicly included in that language.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry.
Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes. Five.
The same thing on 5.305, change on line 5, it has said anyone who has been employed for at least 12 months by the school system, or anyone who has at least 1,250 hours of service. And instead of or, that should be and that's in accordance with federal regulations.
Motion?
Move to approve.
Ms. Hodge? Ms. Moore? Discussion? I don't think we're gonna have a discussion about any. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Last but not least, number 6.
And number 6 is the administrative procedure regarding volunteer coaches. Actually, it's message on that for volunteers. I think Mr. Odom told you that we would bring to this committee for discussion, to talk about whether we want to keep in place the restrictions that we have on the number of volunteer coaches in this administrative procedure. And it's not policies that won't require those. But we implemented the restrictions several years ago when TSBA implemented restrictions on volunteers, and they have their way with the restrictions. So just a discussion on whether we want to keep restrictions or just stay consistent with TWA regulations.
I'd like to hear Mr. Tackett kind of on this one, Mr. Tackett. Mr. Tackett brought it to us and said that, but Mr. Pilot, and I've said to talk to 2 or 3 principals, and talk to them all, you're with them more than I am. Some of them said, well, we're gonna limit it anyway, but
Yeah, I mean,
you need to weigh in on this. Say,
I mean, for us and for our purposes, the unlimited just seems like a lot. I mean, it seems like that could get abused. It just seems like it could, and that's, I mean, there's not gonna be a limit with TLSAA. Of course, everybody that gets registered to TLSAA, they, have to pay a fee. So, I mean, that's more money than TLSAA gets. But I could see getting in a situation where, if this particular school has 6 volunteers, then we need to have 6 volunteers, or if they have 7, we need to have 7, and it's getting, abused, what I think. I mean, it seems to me like the policy is good as it is.
Is there any other policy that we would be differing? Because we pretty much accept whatever TWSAA prescribes. Is it?
That's what we're trying to do.
I mean, is there anything else where we differed from them, except possibly on this one?
And conversely, what you'll hear is, well, other schools that aren't in Rutherford County, they're restricted. I mean, other schools that aren't in Rutherford County, there's no restriction. Why are you restricting our sports teams? We should get the same advantage as other schools have in other counties. So, it's a can of worms, so to speak.
This is-
But I mean, it's a can of worms either way you look at it, and I will say, I mean, I'm here representing principals. Other than booster clubs, nothing gives me more grief than volunteer coaches. I'm just being honest. I'm here because I'm a representative.
Well, and
that's the truth.
principals told me, I'm gonna restrict it whether y'all do or not, whether y'all do or not. I mean, that's what they said. You can go with TWSAA. I'm not gonna have that many. But some might decide to have more. I don't know, but that's the ones that told me.
Yes, this.
Never met a football coach that didn't need one more assistant football. Just have one more.
Well, I don't know, I had, before we placed the restrictions, we had lots.
And it's, hire a player's father to be a volunteer coach, and you're paying the player's father to be a volunteer coach in your team, which, encourages that player maybe to play or stay at your school and those types of things. I don't think we need.
But again, you're speaking for your principal, so that carries a lot of weight.
Everybody is. TWSW's gonna change, but we're gonna stay with the last one they issued.
We don't need to do anything.
Yeah, I don't think any of our teams or something.
Joey wants to do regulations.
Well, it won't be with TWSAA starting next season, because they're gonna say unlimited, we're gonna say this.
Oh, we're gonna keep it
We're
with
gonna
that.
stay-
Yeah.
That's what I do.
Okay.
That, is everybody clear that we're gonna continue the policy as it has been in the recent past? Okay. All right, so that takes care of our work today. Again, thank everyone for attending, and we had several issues. Mr. Jordan?
I just want to thank Mr. Young, terrific leadership for our committee. Thank you.
Very much. And thank you for your participation.
Well, Mr. Young made it a pleasure. I appreciate it.
And again, thank you for this committee, because you've been here a little while. This took some thought process, and I think it was beneficial to our community and the system. So without further ado, I will see Mr. Odom, you, and the rest of my fellow board members tomorrow evening for our regularly scheduled board meeting at 5 o'clock here in the
And if any commissioners are listening to us, in the meantime on TV, we do have the event Saturday. You can come here at 8:30, and we have a bus to go visit David Urey, Smyrna Middle, Rocky Fork area, whatever time we kind of have. Or if you'd like to meet us at Smyrna Middle at 9 o'clock and do the tour. We extended that invitation to commission members, a chance to look at some of the proposed buildings. So that's for this weekend, the 20th of February.
Thank you, Mr. Odom. Anything else? We stand adjourned.